For years, I haven't been getting the right amount of sleep. In fact, I think trading has been one of the reasons for that. According to my sleep tracker, since May 2018, which is when I started using it, I slept an average of 5 hours and 20 minutes per night. And it seems I'm not the only one either. According to the CDC, about 35% of adults receive less than the recommended duration of sleep, which is between 7 and 9 hours per night. But in this video, I'm going to be a massive hypocrite. I'm going to explain how not getting enough sleep can destroy your trading. And I'm not just talking about in the obvious ways either. You know, I think everyone is aware of the negative health and cognitive effects of not getting enough sleep. It leads to higher numbers of illnesses, it leads to worse overall health, and deficits in cognitive processes like concentration, attention, and memory. In fact, sleep loss can even lead to the brain starting to eat itself, as portions of synapses are consumed by astrocytes. So that doesn't really sound like a great situation, does it? Now, for an overall view of how important sleep is, I'd recommend reading the best-selling book by Matthew Walker. In fact, our community just the other day was discussing this, so if you remember, you can also check out that post. But what I want to talk about in this video is more specific to trading, and it isn't something that's from that book. But if you're interested in digging deeper like I have, some of the studies are linked in the description box down below. You see, despite knowing of the negative health effects, trading is still victim to the hustle culture, and people will still sacrifice sleep to spend more time at the charts. Now, if you're tired, then like me, you might depend on caffeine or other stimulants to get you through. Now, this might make you think that you can still perform well since it leaves you feeling more vigilant and more awake, but there's a problem with that. You see, it's been found that decision-making and other aspects of cognition that are affected by poor sleep are actually unrelated to our awakeness or vigilance. So caffeine isn't going to be a solution for that. The only thing that can work is getting the right amount of sleep. And some of these negative effects have a big impact on trading in ways that we aren't even consciously aware of. In particular, how we assess probabilities, risk and reward, and the decisions that we make based on those sorts of things is very much disrupted by getting poor sleep. And it's been found in many different studies that a lack of sleep or poor quality sleep leads us to taking riskier actions without us necessarily realizing it. In studies on risk-taking, it was found that people who do get the right amount of sleep tend to try and minimize the effect of the worst loss in a situation. They're less likely to distort the probabilities of gains and losses, so this means they can make better financial decisions. But when those same exact people are sleep deprived, they become less worried about losses, and instead they shift to strategies that are aimed at improving the size of the best gain in the situation, regardless of the risk. Essentially, what happens is that the activation in regions of our brain related to reward anticipation and emotional processing are altered, and we develop a sort of optimism bias. Now, that might sound great. I mean, who doesn't want to be optimistic? But actually, in this case, optimism and having an optimism bias is not a good thing, because it leads us to start behaving as if positive consequences are more likely or more valuable, while negative consequences are less likely or less valuable. So we have an increased attentional bias towards higher ranked positive outcomes, while simultaneously reducing the concern about losses. We're effectively distorting the probabilities of different outcomes. In fact, one study found that sleep-deprived people chose riskier options in a similar way to patients who have medial frontal damage in their brain. Now, that definitely doesn't sound optimal, does it? Being the same as someone that has some brain damage. So, considering the first rule of great trading is to protect your downside, this is not a good trait to start developing. It's sort of like beginner traders who see dollar signs and focus on the possible reward they can achieve by YOLOing their entire account on an over-leveraged bet, rather than thinking about the consequences if they lose. But why does this happen when we haven't had enough sleep? Well, a theory from one of the studies is that a lack of sleep leads to changes in the transmission of dopamine in our brain, which is obviously involved in our reward system and our motivation for actions. So as dopamine levels are increased in the striatum and thalamus to contribute to maintaining wakefulness, this may also lead to the optimism bias being formed as a byproduct. Another aspect is how sleep loss weakens the neural function of the prefrontal cortex, which is activated during decision making, cognitive behavior, and emotion. So research shows that less activation there is responsible for irrational financial decision making, including the disposition effect, which is basically the tendency for people to hold on to losing trades and close winning trades too soon, and for buying during market bubbles. In fact, those last examples also relate to other studies that show that people with poor sleep are more susceptible to present bias, where more importance is given to the outcomes that are closer to the present, even if they're at the expense of longer-term outcomes that are to their detriment. Now, this includes actions that people take that deviate from their system, things like moving their stop loss or doubling down on a bad trade. And sorry ladies, but it's been shown that this affects women even more than it affects men after poor sleep, so something to be extra careful of. And listen, it really doesn't take much to disrupt our sleep either. We've all recently had the clocks go forward an hour for spring, but did you know that just losing 1 hour of sleep due to daylight savings causes an increase in pedestrian injuries, traffic accidents, fatal vehicle crashes, workplace injuries, and a decrease in an individual's general life satisfaction and mood. Now, some of these things might actually be down to the fact that sleep deprivation can cause impairments in psychomotor function that's equivalent to those being caused by drinking alcohol. Now, I don't know if you've ever traded after drinking, but it's definitely not advisable. Just ask Steve Perkins, who traded oil while drunk and bought enough oil to supply the UK for 4.5 days. It cost his employer PVM Oil Futures $10 million. Now, you don't want to go through the equivalent of that with your own trading, do you? So it's better to avoid it, especially if you're not even getting the pleasure of having a drink to go through that. And at least when you're drinking, you only have to have a hangover for the next day or 2 days when you start becoming an old man like I am. But research has found that losing just 1 hour of sleep can impact your sleep patterns for between 2 days and 2 weeks, with the average time being 1 week. So it's not something that's just going to go away the next time you have a power nap. It's going to stay with you for a little while. But what about after you've made that initial mistake as a result of not getting enough sleep? You'll probably beat yourself up about it and then stop trading for the day, right? Go and get some sleep. Well, according to the research, that's probably not the case. If you haven't had enough sleep, when you take a loss, there's also a decreased activation in the anterior insula in your brain, which therefore reduces your ability to learn from the negative consequences of risky behavior. Because learning from disadvantageous decisions relies on processing emotions related to loss and regret, but sleep deprivation leads to reduced disappointment in losses, similar to patients who have damage in their brain associated with emotional experiences of gains and losses. So once again, sleep is causing similar symptoms to someone that's going through some sort of brain damage. This was shown in a study using the Iowa gambling task. So in the Iowa gambling task, participants are presented with 4 virtual decks of cards on a computer screen. They're told that each deck holds cards that will either reward or penalize them using game money. Now, the goal of the game is to win as much money as possible. The decks differ from each other in the balance of reward versus penalty cards. Thus, some decks are bad decks and other decks are good decks, because some decks will tend to reward the player more often than other decks.
I'll often have 20 to 30 people on my deck at once. That can really wear your dick out.
So, the participants that had enough sleep start to learn to avoid the high-risk decks and start choosing from the good ones instead. But sleep-deprived participants continue to choose from the risky decks. They don't learn from their mistakes. So this double-headed problem of overvaluing rewards and undervaluing risk, while then being desensitized to losses and not learning from negative consequences, can obviously be disastrous for traders. It may lead to a negative spiral of risky decision after risky decision that puts you in total self-destruct mode. Like, I'm sure we all know those times, right? Especially when you're first learning to trade. You have a great run of positive trading for weeks or months, and then one day a loss just gets out of hand. You add to it, double down, move your stop loss, all kinds of bad decisions and end up losing all those great gains you've built up over those past few weeks in just one afternoon like that. So we need to avoid that happening. You need to start getting the right amount of sleep each night. And here are 4 tips that I can tell you from my own experience really do work. So the first tip is that you should have no screens for an hour or 2 before bed. It keeps you awake. Don't look at your phone in bed. Don't watch TV, don't spend time at the computer, and definitely don't do what I used to do when I was younger and go to bed with the laptop open next to you on the bedside table so you can check trades that are open at bedtime. That's just definitely not the right thing to do. And that brings me on to the second tip, which is that you shouldn't have any trades open overnight where the time horizon is short enough that you may be expected to make a decision in the middle of the night. Because if you're like me, this is going to lead you to having restless sleep, as you'll keep waking up every half an hour or so to check on the trade, as if you're looking after a newborn baby. Third, try not to have any caffeine within 5 hours of your bedtime, or longer if you can. Caffeine has a half-life of 5 hours. So if you have a coffee at 5 p.m. and then you want to go to bed at 9:30 p.m, you still might struggle to sleep even though you haven't just had a coffee or anything. It's because it's still in your system. And finally, start using a sleep tracker so you can become more aware of your sleep patterns. The one I use is called Sleep Cycle and it's amazing. Sometimes I might assume that I'm getting enough sleep each night, but then I check the app and I realize I need to up my game a little bit. It's also got the added benefit that it records you snoring, coughing, talking, and if you're a sleep talker like I am, you can listen back to your creepy ramblings. Although it must be said that their AI or machine learning can't quite figure out the difference between a cough and a fart. But on that note, we'll leave this topic there. There's a lot more I could share about sleep and trading, and in particular, how it affects trading related stress. So if you go through a lot of stress with your trading, leave me a comment below letting me know that you want more information on sleep, trading and stress, and I'll hook you up. But anyway, looks like the light is fading fast here, so I might just head off to bed. If you want something else to watch next, then check out this video on trading emotions. Trust me, it's unlike anything you've heard before on trading psychology or trading emotions. It's basically going to teach you how to use your emotions as an edge to benefit your trading, which goes against everything everyone's always told about taking your emotions out of your trading. And don't forget to hit the like button if you found this video useful or interesting, and subscribe for more videos about trading. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. See you soon.